Well, welcome back, everyone. Welcome to this episode of Test Those Breasts. I am your host, Jamie Vaughn, and today I am so excited to have my new friend, Kim Maples, on my show. And we actually met, we were getting our nails done here in Reno, and she was sitting next to me and listening to me tell my story and talk about my podcast to the gal who was doing my nails. And she just sort of peeked in and we started talking, and we've had conversations since then on the phone. And I'm just really thrilled that she's here with us today. She has some really great information to put out there to my audience. And so I just want to give a little bit of information about Kim. So she was diagnosed with ductal breast cancer in 2017 at the age of 39 and went through surgery, chemotherapy, and radiation treatments that same year. After radiation, she's been on different endocrine treatments for the last 6 years and may be on them until 2027. Having gone through many of the more common breast cancer treatments, she has some great advice and recommendations for listeners considering which treatment to go through, who are actively going through treatment and who are post-treatment and trying to make lifestyle changes to keep it from coming back. Well, welcome, Kim. It's so great to see you and hear you. And I just appreciate your having this conversation with us. How are you
I'm
today?
great. Thank you so much, Jamie. That was so funny that this ended up happening based on me eavesdropping on your conversation with your nail tech. So thanks so much for welcoming me to your show.
Well, yeah, I don't have any problem with people eavesdropping. I kind of actually hope that people are, to be honest with you. As my audience knows, I went through quite the ringer with my own breast cancer. And even though it was considered that I caught it early, I was stage 2, and I just went through a lot of stuff. And there were so many things that I just did not know before cancer. And I knew a lot. I had friends who had breast cancer. I knew people, but it was astounding how much I did not know and how much more I had to learn how to advocate for myself and understand the options out there. So talking to people like you really truly makes a huge difference in helping people understand what their options are and just shortening the learning curve for all these people out there. So I just want to start out. I always try to start out with this just because I think it's really important to understand who my guests are, they were even before cancer, before this even was a blip in your mind. So who was Kim Maples before cancer?
Yeah. Well, I'm a military brat, grew up in the Philippines and in Hawaii with my dad being in the Air Force. And then at 19, went to Southern California in the Riverside area for college, for community college, and then moved to San Jose State and lived in the Bay Area for the next 10 to 20 years and then recently moved to Reno about 3 years ago. I have a family, a husband, children. Cancer was something in my mind at those times that sort of older people got. But it wasn't something that I even needed to have on my radar in my 30s. And when I was diagnosed, my children were very young. So they were 1 and 3 years old at that time, and cancer was, like, the farthest thing from my mind when you're dealing with lack of sleep and childcare while working full time and life and all sorts of marital things that are happening with the new family and kids, and so, life was very busy, life was hectic. Life in the Bay Area for everyone, for those that might live there, is a very fast-paced lifestyle. You work a lot, but I my grandparents, 2 of them passed away from cancer, but it just didn't I never thought to inquire. It wasn't like, "Oh, let me learn more." And I think after I was diagnosed with breast cancer, there's a lot of genetic questions that come into your mind, right? Especially at 39 when you're diagnosed early, you start thinking like, "Oh, is there a correlation?" And I'll get into this, but for me, there wasn't a genetic correlation. And I remember asking my dad, who is a boomer, I was like, "How did your mom pass? How did grandma pass?" And she passed when I was about 3 years old, so I was very young. And he goes, "Lady part cancer." She had lady part cancer. And I was like, "Dad, lady part cancer?" I was like, "Ovarian, uterine." breast, like, what is lady part cancer? And he's like, I don't know. And I think in those days, right, there wasn't a drive for more information to really get to the heart of it. And what's the primary? Was there a secondary? And, all these things. And he's just like, I don't know what to tell you. I don't know. And I asked my mother, whose mom passed of cancer, and my mom is Asian. She's from China, Taiwan. So my papa, my grandmother died in Singapore at the time. So she wasn't super close distance wise when she passed. And I remember asking her, how did she pass? She was like, I don't know. All I know is that her belly button turned black and she might have had stomach cancer. I don't know. And I said, primary, secondary. She's like, I have no idea. So I think it's so interesting now at how much information we have and at our fingertips. And, you and I just even talking at the nail salon, like and it's funny when you hear someone talking about breast cancer after you've been through years of, it's just, it never ends. You just constantly like, it's a little radar. You just pick up on it and then you want to talk because your podcast is so excellent in the way that most of the information you get from doctors is very helpful as far as obviously keeping you alive, but sometimes the treatment is almost it's almost as bad as the cancer or worse. And a lot of things that the doctors can't tell you how to supplement herbal thing. You know what I mean? Things that are not in Western world scientifically tested and verified. So it really helps to have a tribe of people who've been through it and have little tricks and tips. And yeah, it's not stuff that is like clinically trialed or anything like that. But goodness, I'll talk a little bit about it. For 5 years ago, I was icing my fingers during chemo to try to keep it from neuropathy from coming up, right? And then I talked to my doctor, she was like, "Do it, excellent." This was 6 years ago now. Now, clinical trials, I'm seeing data come out from, news articles saying that, "Oh, you should actually ice your toes and fingers for neuropathy." I'm like, "Yeah, that was there 6 years ago, but they couldn't talk about it because there wasn't a trial." So it helps to have a forum like this. So that's great that you put her.
Right. It's really interesting. I've talked to quite a few people, and I have a friend of mine who has been going through breast cancer, and she's a little bit older than I am. And it was really interesting when she found out that I had breast cancer, and at some point she reached out to me. And I the conversation I had with her was so interesting. I was so completely different than she was. And in that, I talk about it all the time. Like when I first got breast cancers, I had a friend of mine tell me that it is the sisterhood of all
Oh, it is.
sisterhoods and she says, you just wait, girl. And it really is. And I mean, I've become really good friends with people that I've never even met in person. They're all over the world and on Instagram and things like that. And this particular friend of mine, he used to be my boss at one of the schools, and she just didn't talk about it much. She was super quiet about it. And I think part of it is that generational piece that you were just
Yeah.
talking about that
Suffer in silence.
your grandparents, yeah, they didn't talk lady part cancer. You just don't talk about those things. Like you don't talk about nipples, you don't talk about your vagina, you don't talk about, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? So I'm really focused on saving the world in a way that we can talk about it and we can sit in the nail salon and talk about our breasts and things like that. So I just am so glad that you brought that up because we are the ones who are changing that trajectory of how we communicate with our own families. So like your kids,
I have a
are going to
daughter and I have
know that
outlined
mom had
everything. She will know
totally
everything.
like okay, Kim, my mom didn't even teach me how to put a tampon in. My
My
mom
mom
didn't
didn't
even she
either.
bought me pads,
No.
but now it's like we teach
Yeah.
our kids how to put a tampon in, right? It's just really interesting. So, I want to get into you found out about your breast cancer in such an interesting way. I would like you to talk about how you discovered it and why it is that you decided to go in and get tested early because you weren't even 40 and a lot of people are told they can't even
Mhm.
get a test. So,
Yeah.
can you walk us through?
It was totally just as it's the same vein as your podcast, right? I had a friend named Dana who was in her early 40s at that time, so not that much older than myself, who had her routine mammogram. and who was diagnosed with breast cancer, and Dana's doing fine and she's healthy today. But she brought it to my attention via Facebook, and Dana and I weren't friends that saw each other every day, but we did sort of have that Facebook connection. And she was very much more so than anyone I've met, very open with her treatment. I mean, documenting pictures of her in the chemo chair, you know what I mean? Like, "Hey, here's what I'm struggling with today." And I think she used Facebook as a very cathartic, like, give me energy type of way. So, because once you put something out there, your friends are like, "You can do this, you got this." So, I think in seeing her posts very frequently during that time, I was 39 and I had no inclination at all that I might even have breast cancer. Again, farthest thing from my mind. My husband and I had gone through some rough marital things with the new kids and everything, so we were kind of past that a little bit, going to therapy and stuff, and then my kids were very young, and I remember complaining to my doctor that I was really fatigued, and she was like, duh, you have a 1 and a 3-year-old, and you work full time, and life is crazy. You are fatigued because every new mom is." And I was like, "But this is different. This is like I know my body and I'm pretty like active, energetic person. Like this is more than normal." And she's like, no, you're that's it. Like you're just, life." And something in me just saw Dana's stories and just I thought to myself, "You know what? I'm 39." It was early that year, so it was like February. My birthday is like September-ish later in the year. So it was even early at 39. I was like, "I'm just going to go see if my insurance would say yes." And so luckily they did. They let me go in early. And so I just went in for a routine mammogram. I don't even know why I did it. Dana inspired me. And it's weird so I was diagnosed with breast cancer on my right side. They found like a shadow, right? Calcification. I guess I learned I have very dense breasts. It's like seeing like a tumor is like a polar bear in a snowstorm, right? It's all white. And so I was like, "Oh, I don't even know what dense breast mean, but okay." So they were like, "There's some calcification, you have dense breast, it's probably nothing, like, but just come in and we're just gonna do an ultrasound." It's like super uninvasive. I was like, "Okay." So we went on vacation, I came back like a month later and they were like, "What's interesting, the calcification part of your breast is fine, but on the opposite side of like a clock, your breast is like a clock. So the 9 o'clock part was fine. The 3 o'clock, they see a mass." And I'm like, "What do you mean you see a mass?" And they're like, "It's probably nothing. Like most biopsies are negative, you know what I mean? But let's just biopsy it just in case." So I was like, "No problem, not worried about it at all." They biopsy it and I was, diagnosed, surprisingly, with, ductal carcinoma. I was just Jamie, should I go into what it was? Is that helpful for me to share?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely. Yeah, for
So
sure.
it was ductal, and I think a lot of breast cancer is ductal. And so I had ductal carcinoma, and it was very ER/PR positive. So everyone's breast cancer is so unique, right? It's like almost like a fingerprint. So mine was over 99% estrogen, progesterone receptor positive. I was borderline on the HER2 when they tested me, so I had to do what is additional testing for that called a FISH. So when the doctor can't really tell if you're clearly HER2 positive or negative, you end up getting an additional test just to be super sure. It's called a FISH, and so I had that, and I was found to be HER2 negative. But when they went in after the whole thing, I was shocked. I was like, "I'm 39. I have no history of breast cancer. I mean, lady part cancer, but I don't know, breast cancer in my family." My mom never had cancer. My dad has never had prostate cancer. Like, what is this? And so there is no genetic component that I know of for me to have gotten diagnosed so young. But they did find it was a 1.2 centimeter tumor, and by the time they had done all the tests, the sentinel node biopsies with the lymph, they took out 7 out of my lymph, and one of them had cancer. So I did have lymphatic lymph node, like,
Mhm.
progression, I guess.
What did they stage it at?
At that time, they staged me at 2B.
Okay, and I think that so I was told mine made it past the ducts, but not to the lymph nodes, and they staged me at 2, and I
Oh,
don't know whether it was
they
must be
changed those
2A or
things.
something.
Yeah.
It's just so confusing, and I probably should have someone on here, like an oncologist. I actually did have an oncologist on here from New York. Tiffany, Dr. Tiffany Troso. And I probably should get with her again. And we were in contact all the time and talk to her about what's the difference, like what makes it stage one, stage two, stage three. So I want to go back to wow.
Dana
I
saved my
mean,
life.
yeah, so it's amazing how many people you are affecting when you're talking to someone like that. She
She
saved your
did.
life. She
100%.
made you think about it. But even further than that, Kim, you listened to your body. I've always been pretty intuitive with my body. Like if I'm not feeling right, I'll go to the doctor. I'll let them know, no, this is
Yeah.
different. And just the mere fact that you told your doctor, first of all, I don't think she realized this, but she was kind of brushing off
Yeah.
what you were feeling and just chalking it up to, well, you have kids, you have babies. But the fact of the matter is that you knew your body well enough and you had the wherewithal to make a decision and advocate for yourself and go in. And that is seriously half the battle is advocating for yourself. So kudos to
Thank
you
you.
for doing that. And kudos to Dana.
Oh,
I
Dana.
love her. I
Yes.
want her on my
I
podcast.
know. She's awesome. I'll ask her.
Okay.
Yeah.
That would be great. So, you talked about what your diagnosis was. How about your treatment? What did they put you through? What is it that this
What
put
is
you
I
through?
know. Oh, it is nothing. No, so it is a very personal thing, right? Everyone's diagnosis is so unique, yours and mine, everyone listening, and it does help to okay, so I have friends that are HER2 and what they go through. I have no idea what it is like to have be HER2 positive. And then I have other friends who are not ER/PR positive. And so everyone's treatment option based on their cancer is so different. I had no idea breast cancer was so variable in that way. To me, it's one of the more variable cancers. Like I've had friends who've had colon cancer and it's kind of cut and dry, you know? And so it is really interesting how and it's so interesting that needed that this type of forum happens because there's so many different options and it's hard to there's not one place where you go to learn all the options for everything. So,
Well, yeah, and it's amazing how many people don't know about all the variables. I didn't know either. I had people actually reaching out to me and saying, "Jamie, what are they doing? Why don't they just need to get in there and cut that
oh my
sucker out of
gosh,
there?"
yeah.
And that's not how it works. Depending on the type of or the type of cancer you have,
Chemo
really
beforehand, chemo
dictates what kind of
after,
treatment.
mastectomy,
Exactly.
lumpectomy, deep flap, not deep, you know what I mean? What do you want? We're so blessed though that there are so many options. I think when my grandmother probably had cancer, unfortunately, it was like one you get one, they cut everything. They take all your lymph nodes, right?
And you're basically told what's gonna happen, is that
Yes.
they were living and we still have this a little bit today, that patriarchal type medical
Yeah.
system where the doctor comes in and says, "You have cancer, we're doing this, and that's it," and
Yeah.
it's amazing how many times that has happened. So
Treatments,
treatments.
yes. Okay, keep me in line here. So I really waffled around mastectomy versus lumpectomy, and I think it is such a personal decision. My tumor was small enough at 1.2 centimeters to where my doctor was like, "It's up to you. I don't have a dog in this fight. Like you pick what you want." And I know that I've had friends who've gone through mastectomy, and it's a lot of surgeries, right? It's a lot. Yeah, I know your journey with your surgery. It was like, I don't know if I felt up to it at that time. So I went the lumpectomy route, which then necessitated radiation. If you do mastectomy, a lot of times you might not need radiation. And I don't think that was fully explained to me at the time. And especially just learning, I'm not a doctor. So, when you have breast cancer, it does matter which breast the tumor resides in. So if you have breast cancer in your left breast, when they radiate your breast, there's going to be some heart radiation happening. Your heart is
Mm.
closer. And so I encourage everyone who has any breast cancer on the left breast to really give that lumpectomy versus mastectomy decision a little bit more thought outside of, oh, the, implants and whatnot, because the radiation that they are going to require with the lumpectomy will influence and impact your heart a little bit more than me. Mine was on the right side. I'm not saying, oh, it didn't touch my heart at all, but they can angle the radiation machines a little bit better on the right side breast to avoid your heart. And you do not want to radiate your heart. So, little tip.
No.
Um,
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, I didn't have to have radiation, luckily, knock on wood. I think this is real wood.
yeah. With the so that's a big thing. So the factor of, oh, it's more than aesthetics, right? And it's more than surgical downtime. It's also the radiation part of it. And I don't know. I don't think I, quote, regret my decision yet because, but your radiation can rear itself many years later. And so far, so good. But I chose lumpectomy. I did a mammoth print. So I don't know, Jamie, if they did that with you, but it was like an additional genomic test to determine whether or not I actually needed chemo.
No, but I have a good friend that I interviewed on this podcast who at some point we're going to be talking about that. She works in the genomic sphere and radiology and mammography, and we want to talk about
Good.
that. So we are planning that, but no. And that would be really interesting.
Yeah.
And I would love to know how to go about that,
Yeah.
Kim.
Nobody wants chemo if they don't need it, right? And there's all sorts of tests that you can take to really at that time, so this is again 6 years ago, 2017, mammoprint was like the new test. It's not a genetic test, it's genomic test. So listeners, there's a difference, and I'm not a doctor, but they really took a look in the sliver of my tumor, tested it, and there you get a line and like 0 to 100, and then 50 is like, so it's essentially, no, you don't need chemo. Yes, you need chemo. And you might fall anywhere in this scale between 0 and 100. And so I was like, "Oh god, please be under a 50, please be under 50." And, unfortunately, I was somewhere between the 50 and 60 mark. So my doctor was like, "I'm sorry, it's a yes or no test, like, you need chemo." Because my guess my tumor genomics were more aggressive, and so there's a higher likelihood of it coming back or in my bloodstream, or you know what I mean, something, lymphatic system. So we did chemo. I did, what I think they don't really do now. I did 4 adriamycin, like, episodes. So the Red Devil, I did 4 of those. Terrible, horrible, with Cytoxan. And then I also did about 4 rounds of Taxol afterwards. So it was hardcore, lost the hair, did all of that. Um, and then I did radiation after, both to my lymph nodes and to my breast. And then I did a mixture of, let's see, tamoxifen and the aromatase inhibitor. So I go back and forth, and I'll talk about that, my experience with the aromatase inhibitor and tamoxifen, which puts you in menopause, essentially. So I started
Mhm.
that in 2018 until now. I'm still in menopause. I'm 46. That part really sucks, being in menopause so early. There's some, I don't know, I'll like silver lining this in the sense that I do not miss my period. That is one thing I don't
That's
miss.
a nice silver lining.
Let's talk about the silver
That's a
lining.
nice silver
Yeah,
lining.
that's a big silver lining, the bloating and the this and the that. But yeah, all in all, I never really thought I would miss having a period, but I do. It's so weird. It was such an annoying thing growing my whole life. And then I'm like, I would really love to have a period. Let's see. So that was, yeah, that's a recap there.
Yeah, you went through a lot, and that this is really a good conversation in that cancer your cancer journey is just flat out not over once
Oh
you're
my
cancer
gosh.
free.
My friends always say, oh, you're in remission. Aren't you excited?
You're getting back to
And I'm
normal.
like, "No, 6 years later, I just had a surgery to remove my ovaries last year." Do you know what I mean? I'm still on meds every day. It's not over. I'm still in
I
menopause,
heard
you
that
know?
I heard that I had for my last surgery 6 weeks ago was my phase 2 deep flap. I learned that removing your ovaries is called an oophorectomy.
Oophorectomy.
No idea. I had no idea that's what
Yeah,
it was called. I was like, "Hey, can I get the rest of my stuff out? Can I have the
yeah.
rest of my hysterectomy?" And they called it a oophorectomy. I'm
Oophorectomy.
like, "Oh, see, you learn something new every day." I'm
Yeah.
56 and I'm such a lifelong
I
learner.
know. This is, like, not exactly what I wanted to be learning about, but lots to learn for sure.
Well, just the whole mere fact that you went in and you listened to yourself and you got the testing done and you shockingly found out that you, in fact, had breast cancer. Did you tell your doctor that?
Oh, yeah. She was the one that actually called me, and she was very sweet. She was very upset for me, yeah. She
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I feel like these kinds of situations really teach doctors a lot. I mean, doctors, they're doctors, they know a lot. And obviously, but they are not infallible and I really have a lot of respect for doctors who are open to learning and understanding. Maybe this is something that I need to pay more attention to, especially when patients come in and ask me or talk to me about how they're feeling. So I'm glad that she knew and that she understood and probably changed the trajectory of how she handles
Yeah,
that
I don't know
now.
statistically if more people are being diagnosed younger, but I guess, in her defense, she just didn't expect a 39-year-old
Yeah.
to have breast cancer, and I have a lot of friends now that more and more once you have breast cancer, all your friends are like, "Oh my god, now I had." So it's that thing where you start hearing about it, but they're young. I mean, so
Yeah,
I don't
they
know if
are.
more people are
And
getting diagnosed, but it's like, wow.
they are.
Yeah.
They
Okay.
are, and there are several podcast interviews that I've done with women who have been diagnosed in their early 30s. I'm on Instagram with some people who have been diagnosed in their late
Wow.
20s, but up into early 40s. And so the statistics are
Yeah.
scarily
Trending in
higher.
a bad direction.
And
Yeah, in a surprising direction
yeah,
maybe. So
but the part about your doctor is that, yes, in her defense, she was not expecting that,
oh,
but now
now
she
she knows.
knows.
Yeah.
And it's because of you, at least part of because of you. Your life now, you are you're still in treatment. And what is your life like right now? What are
Yeah.
your side effects and
Oh my
things like
gosh, so
that?
much. Okay, so I like thought about our conversation before getting on here and stuff that I would love to have known about or somebody to educate me on before embarking on this journey. My life now, so I didn't immediately get a oophorectomy after my treatment was done. I don't know. I started researching a lot about estrogen and how important it was for women or is for women. And there's a lot of new data coming out around estrogen and Alzheimer's and how important that hormone is for us to actually have brain health and cognitive like improvements and all these things, right? So I actually used to be like, oh, my estrogen is so annoying. It's like when I'm like hormonal and fight with my husband. But I didn't realize just like, oh, I really miss it and how much it's needed. So I didn't jump into doing the oophorectomy immediately. I was on Lupron, which was a shot in your fat or your stomach every 28 days to keep you from having your period. So I did that for about 5 years. And every month I would go into the doctor and get the shot in my stomach. It was not pleasant, or in my buttocks, and to keep that at bay. And that was financially kind of difficult as well because then I would always max out on my medical premium, right? So it's like those shots are not cheap, and having to do them 12 times a year and like taking time out of my month to go in to get a shot and this whole thing. And I think part of me was doing that because I had this like thought that eventually at 50 or at 48, I'm going to stop this and maybe I'll get some more estrogen and I'll be okay again, in the sense that it'll come back and then it'll ward off any Alzheimer's or anything. You know what I mean? Like anything else I have to worry about. I don't know. I'm so obsessed with Alzheimer's. And then I think I talked to my oncologist and she's like, I don't actually want you to have estrogen ever. She's like, I'm probably going to end up keeping you on these endocrine therapies until you're in menopause. And once you're in menopause, you don't have it. So you might want to consider getting an oophorectomy and a hysterectomy sooner than later so you don't have to max out on your insurance all the things. So I'd gone back and forth with this. And I think a year ago, I was like, God, I am really sick of getting shots in my stomach. They are not pleasant. And so I just went in to a doctor here in Reno and did it. So we did the oophorectomy, and I decided to take the uterus out as well for the hysterectomy because I just thought it's another organ that might get cancer later on. So there's no damage. There's no, she's like, your pelvic floor looks good. Sometimes you might need it for stability to hold things in. But she's like, I don't think there's no reason why you should leave it in. If you want to take it out, you can take it out. That was like optional. And I chose to get the hysterectomy too because I was like, that's the last thing I need is to have 10 years from now uterine scare. So
Right.
I was like, just get it out. So we did that. I do have some knowledge and just personal thoughts around some people. You're given so many choices, right? So when you're ERPR positive, you're going to be in menopause. You can choose to do the tamoxifen route, which I think blocks the receptor for estrogen. And then you have but you don't need to have these Lupron shot every month. I don't know, Jamie, is yours ERPR positive, but you're diagnosed later, so it's not a factor?
I was HER2 positive, estrogen and progesterone
Oh, okay. So
negative.
this is not a world that you're
Mhm.
like, okay.
Nope.
I see. So I don't know much about
I
her too because
because
it's so different. So so there's two, right? So there's the tamoxifen and then the aromatase inhibitor, which is like anastrozole. And if you want to take anastrozole, there's actually a higher, I'm not going to say the percentage because again, I'm not a doctor and the clinical trial is not coming to my mind, but more oncologists now are recommending the Lupron, which is a brand name. I don't know the medicine name, but it's a Lupron with aromatase inhibitor option because it's shown to actually have like 5% more survival rate. You know what I mean? The survival rate for that drug is a little bit higher than tamoxifen, but the degradation on your bones and the osteoporosis risk and all the things that come with menopause is so much greater with this anastrozole one because you literally, I don't know, tamoxifen to me, I've done both and I am doing both, and I'll explain that a little bit why. But tamoxifen, like, you still feel like yourself a little bit to me. When you're on anastrozole Lupron, like you feel like you're dried up, like there's nothing to squeeze, like your joints hurt like this. So I did tamoxifen for 1 year, and they wanted to put me on endocrine for 10 years because I was so young when I was diagnosed. They do not want me to have periods, like, ever. So that means most people hit menopause probably in their 45 to 50s. So that means I'm gonna be on this until probably 50, and then they'll take me off and see what happens. But um, the clinical trials for anastrozole Lupron really kind of look at that 5-year survival rate, but they have found the benefits of staying on that regime medically for 5 years. Okay, so suffer through Lupron and anastrozole, that dry feeling, that degradation in your bone density for 5 years. And so I went on tamoxifen for a year, switched to anastrozole for 5 years, and I had noticed that my bone density was declining rapidly. So I was totally
Oh.
healthy bone density. I work out a lot. I have always done weights since in my 20s. And I was like almost to the point of osteoporosis last year.
Oh, wow.
And she was like, "Okay, but you're not in osteoporosis yet, so you're good." And I'm like, "But there's a drastic decline every 2 years when you're doing my density test. It has dropped a lot." And she was like, "But you're not in osteoporosis, so you're good." And I'm like, "But I'm gonna be in osteoporosis in 2 years when you test again. Aren't you like, I can see this trajectory." And she was like, "Well, you're not yet, so I think you're gonna be okay." And I had asked her, and this is not a dig on my doctor, it's just the way that doctors think, right? And I said, "What if I switch to tamoxifen now? I've done my 5 years of anastrozole, right? This is the clinical trial benchmark minimum, like, you need to do 5 years in order to get better survival rates." She was like, "Yes, that's true. You've done your 5 years." And I said, "Tamoxifen has proven better osteoporosis outcomes than the alternative. I've removed my ovaries, right? Like, can I do this?" And she was like, "You know what? You're right. Let's put you on tamoxifen." So I went on tamoxifen again last year or beginning of this year, so kind of the end of last year. And tamoxifen should hopefully stop my bone density loss. So I think in your journey, even 6 years out, right, Jamie? Like, you just have to keep advocating for yourself. And when they're like, "Oh, but you're not an osteoporosis yet," you're gonna be like, "I'm getting there. This is not okay. I'm 46. I shouldn't have osteoporosis."
Right. I think that there are some doctors who are not necessarily used to, or open to, I don't know what the right term is, but people who actually advocate for themselves
Mhm.
and question them. I had that a couple of circumstances that happened with me too, where I would question and it, I think
You're
it
going
kind
outside of
of
that
like usually
15-minute
they're the
bubble
ones.
that they give you.
Yeah.
10 minutes.
Yeah, exactly,
Ugh.
exactly. That's really interesting. So good for you for advocating, and thank you for saying to the audience that, hey, 6 years out and really your whole entire life, you need to advocate for yourself. You need to know what's going on with your body, and you need to remember those things, and because in the end, you're the one who is going to be taking care of your body, and the doctors are there, but you've got to have the questions, you've got to have the knowledge, you've got to have the mm, girl parts
Yeah.
to question.
I mean, I'm not to go into it too private information as well. There has been another benefit to shifting the medicines that I was on, not to get too, like, personal, but I was suffering from a lot of, like, vaginal dryness with, the anastrozole because, again, like I said, it is the nuclear option for menopause. Like, it takes everything. And I mean, I had a lot of hip pain and, you just feel very dry and like, oh my gosh, like, so my hair, you know what I mean? A lot of hair loss kind of stuff happening. Um, and then when I switched, I will say, just for those that are considering like Mona Lisa's touch or other things that affect your vaginal dryness area. One thing for me is I noticed that the moment I went back to tamoxifen, it was like night and day. It's not painful to have intercourse. You know what I mean? It is so much better. For 5 years, it was very painful and it was like a very, like, hard thing for our marriage, you know what I mean? It was just a lot.
Sure.
So, I do think it's worth for your listeners to understand too that the 2 medicines you can take them in different parts of your treatment, talk to your doctor, but, like, it has helped me in that area as well as I hope the
Mhm.
bone loss area. I don't know yet. I'm still gonna go and do my bone density testing, but from all the things I read online about tamoxifen versus anastrozole, tamoxifen is actually it can build bone marrow or bone density, bone marrow.
Oh,
So I don't
okay.
know. It's just
Good to
between the
know.
2, you're not locked in one forever.
Okay. Good to
Yeah.
know. I never knew that. Looking back before I found out I had breast cancer, I mean, I had it when in this part that I'm going to tell you right now, it was probably about a month beforehand. My husband and I were, having some sex, and
Yep.
it hurt
No.
so bad. I was shocked. Like it knocked the wind out of me. That's how
Yeah.
bad it hurt. And I couldn't believe it. And my husband was just like, "Oh my gosh," And after I went through all of the chemo and all of the things, I went to a new doctor here in town, and she was amazing. And she actually told me that I think that when you have breast cancer, I think that that kind of thing happens anyway. But she had told me that when it does push you into menopause, your vagina shrinks.
Wow.
And I never knew that your vagina
I didn't
shrinks.
know
It
that.
shrinks this way and this way. And yeah, and so she put me on, God, what is it? Uvafem, I think it
Yeah, I
is.
have that
And then
too, but
there's a
since I'm
company.
ERPR positive,
Yeah,
I shouldn't take it. My doctor's sort of like, "You can take
right.
it," but maybe I've decided not to, but yeah. Does it help?
Oh my gosh, yes, yes, it does if you actually remember to put it in
Yeah.
there. And but also there's a company called Bonafide, and they have things that help out with vaginal dryness and things like that. And so I remember after I had taken it for a while, and you insert them every night or every other night, alternate. I remember when my husband and I were like, "Okay,
Let's try it.
let's try." And we did, and it didn't hurt. I was like, "Oh
Wow.
god, thank God."
I mean, it's a
Because
big
I
deal,
was, It is a
It's
big
something that you
deal. It
don't really like,
is. It
"Ugh,
is.
talk about my, relationship," but it
Yeah.
was like night and day, and the pain, right, it was very painful. Like, I mean, it impacted our marriage. I mean, I didn't wanna have sex. It hurt.
So I do want to ask, and if I'm just curious and you don't have to go into detail. How was your husband as a caregiver? Was he your caregiver, like primary
Yeah.
caregiver? Is
I
he?
am a very type A person, so I wouldn't consider him like a caregiver in my sense. That is not a ding on him at all, but I'm just like I don't know, he's a very supportive spouse in that way, and I think I mentioned earlier on that we had gone through some marital stuff the year before I was diagnosed. So, it was great that I mean, it was terrible when it was happening because we had to, we almost split up and we went through therapy and that whole thing. But in actuality, that year of tribulation between he and I, like, made my cancer journey, we were stronger in that way. And so we had laid a foundation for our marriage to not be affected by the cancer. And I've heard a lot of people talk about it broke my marriage and it was really hard for us to remain connected and all these things. So my husband and I were still very close in that way, but I wouldn't have called him I don't know, I wouldn't have called him my caregiver. He was my emotional cheerleader, 100%, but I was still taking care of my 1 and 3-year-old. Like, I'm a mom, you know what I mean? I had a 1 and 3-year-old, and I actually still worked, whether people think that's silly or not, but for me, I still worked while going through treatment, so I didn't actually stop working. And for me, that kept my mind off of the treatments. I worked probably from 9 to 1 or 2 in the afternoon every day, so it wasn't like until 5 or 6. I didn't work nights, I didn't work weekends, the usual stuff, but I had a very understanding company and manager who was like, "You wanna work during chemo? Amazing. You do what you wanna do." So I tried to keep my life as normal and as it used to be, so I didn't have gaps
Mhm.
of me sitting there just thinking about cancer because my kids were
Right.
needing me. I I don't think I necessarily had a caregiver in that way, and also I did a lumpectomy, so it
Okay.
wasn't a very invasive surgery. Um,
Right.
so yeah, emotional cheerleader.
Except for Yeah, except for you did go through some crazy treatments.
Yes, that's
So even
true.
though you had a lumpectomy, it still, yeah, affected you
The
in a lot of
chemo was,
different ways.
difficult. It wasn't something that I was like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe I survived it." I mean, I did the full treatment. I didn't stop. Yeah, for me, it was a blur. I just remember taking care of my kid,
Yeah.
bald
Yeah.
and all that
You
stuff.
In a sense, and I always hate from when people think or feel like they have to say, "It's almost I didn't have to do this, and so I had it much easier than you," or mine was
Yeah,
stage
there's not a
1 and
competition,
yours was
right?
stage.
Yeah.
Right, it's not a competition no matter what. Breast cancer is breast cancer, and it's freaking scary, and you have to do things that you just never expected to
Yeah.
have to do. I went through the treatment, and I had to get shots. I had to target the estrogen and progesterone negative piece. I had to do now I forget. See, I put it out of my
I
mind, Kim.
know. You wanna forget.
Progetta and yeah, I had to do all that for the rest of the year, and I did opt to do the complete mastectomy. I had the breast cancer in my left breast, and I decided to go full mastectomy and reconstruction. And I did my phase 2, which essentially was optional, but it's always nice to be able to
Yeah.
lift, move, make them more
Yeah, those things are
symmetrical
important,
and things
right?
like that. But they are, and I'm 6 weeks out
You
post-op
look
and,
great.
got s well, I will tell you, if you saw pictures of me, you would never even know that my surgery was 6 weeks
Wow.
ago. The incisions look so good.
Eh
They are all I mean, all of this all the scabbing is gone and everything, and Dr. Cabling at Center for Restorative Breast Surgery in New Orleans did such a phenomenal job with the first phase that if I could never have phase 2 for whatever reason, I would be okay with that because he did such a great
Good for you.
job. I did go back and it was nice to see him again. I interviewed him on this podcast and he was wonderful along with several other surgeons. And so, okay, let's talk a little bit and we wrap up our
Yeah.
conversation. what are some of the others besides your period going away, but now you want it back? What are some
Never
other
thought I'd say that.
silver linings? What are some other silver linings that you would
Yeah.
say has you've noticed?
Silver linings, yeah, I would say I have a very full life, and, I'm very blessed in that way, and I don't take it for granted, and so my kids are older now, and of course, I get mad at them, and I'm still like, "Oh my gosh," I can be, very emotional, but all in all, it's so cliche, but you do try not to take things for granted, right? And as I age, this is a sad note, but I do see some of my friends also passing it. And I'm like, wow, I do feel like I have to, I know maybe going into a negative area here. I'm going to switch it around. The silver lining is that I become more like in tune with my body, even more than I was. And I think before I was like, I'm fatigued, but I would go years without exercising. I would put motherhood ahead of going to the gym or doing something for myself. And I think my kids are older now, so I have the luxury of also they can make their own food sometimes and do some stuff. I've really tried to like physical exercise. Okay, so I have more time to do it. The silver lining is that I get to do it more now and then I've prioritized it more. And I think long term, yes, I've had breast cancer and I've had some subsequent weird scares afterwards, but I don't know, that's for another show, some lymphoma scares and whatnot, but I don't have lymphoma that I know of. Um, but I realize that exercise is like the savior. It is the thing that will like lengthen longevity and increase everyone's like longevity and mobility for decades until so it's not so much about even like living long, it's about living well and moving and all that stuff. So I think for me, I don't think I would have been so attuned to making sure that I can make these life choices or changes that would help me when I'm 60 or 70 or 80. And unless I had the breast cancer and I'm reading books and I'm looking at studies and I'm like really thinking about, gosh, when I'm 70, I want to be the 70 or 80-year-old that can like walk up a hill or go up a flight of
Yeah.
stairs. I don't even think I would be thinking about that at 46 if I didn't have a health scare like this. I think, and I didn't realize the things that you do today are so influential on who you are 10 years from now, what you eat. So I do view, my husband and I have very opposite views. He doesn't view food as medicine, but I do. He's like, it's for taste and the
Hey,
French, they know. And I'm like, no.
I yeah. I
Oh,
I can relate 100%. 100%. It's the same in this household.
yeah, so he's like, "Oh,
Oh,
it's
it
for,
it
enjoyment." And I'm like, "No, it's for, I it's medicinal. Food is so important in how you feel just today, but like next year and 3 years from now and 5 years." So, the silver lining is I think I have a very much more how do I make changes today to help the future, and I hope 10 years from now or more, 20 years from now, I'll start seeing the benefits of that.
I feel like that's really part of your piece of advice also to our audience is that what you do today is very important. Exercise has been really important to me as well. And since I've had surgery, I haven't been able to do much and it's
Oh,
driving me
yeah.
crazy. I had gotten into yoga and everything. Um, so it looks like my new little puppy, who is 9 weeks old, I had her in her crate and looks like she's shaking around in there looking to get out of there. We were really lucky that
Yeah.
that she was pretty quiet. And can let's go ahead and leave our audience with what kind of advice would you give? And really give to people, and you kind of talked about this a little bit anyway, to people who either have yet to be diagnosed or people who have just been diagnosed and they're like overwhelmed beyond belief right now.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it's know your body, right? And don't be afraid to be that. I think you and I both talked about it, right? That patient that takes more than 10 minutes with your doctor and comes with a list of questions. I don't think that there's anything wrong with that because nobody is going to advocate for your body as much as you will. And I am that patient who has a binder of my diagnoses and all of my
Great.
everything printed based on so I have the exact date and every time I see a new doctor, I just hand them the binder and I can just flip through it, you know what I mean? On, "Oh, did you get this? What radiation did you have? What chemo? When?" All of that. I really think
That's
advocating for yourself is important.
Yeah, so people who are watching this on YouTube, such a great idea. Dr. Tiffany Troso also is very much an advocate for getting a binder, getting something where you can keep everything in
Yeah.
there, keeping all your side effects in there, and just all the things. You should see how not organized I am. I know
We
what
get you a
happened and
binder.
I know where to get the information. Yeah, I need a binder.
No, it's helpful, and then also in my I'm thinking my daughter will have this, right? There's not gonna be a lady
Yeah,
part question of what did mom have, when, at what
right.
age. It's like, it's there. So,
It's like having a trust, right? It's
yeah,
like setting your kids up for understanding where things are for when you die so that it's not super overwhelming and freaking out trying to
your
find
medical
out how
record,
to do this, how to do that. Yes, medical
closely
records.
guarded.
I love that,
Oh my
Kim.
gosh.
That's
Yeah. So
perfect.
just know your body and
Well,
advocate for yourself, and don't be afraid for your doctor to just be a little bit annoyed with you that you've taken a
mhm.
little bit more of their time after every appointment. That's actually probably a win.
I think it is a win too. I always tell people I don't care if they think I'm an asshole.
Yeah.
Sorry. It's like
I mean, yeah.
I don't care if they think I'm a pain in the neck or
Mm.
anything. I
I
just
get a
you
bunch
know,
of
I
tests.
get
Even
this
to
is
this
my
day, I'm
time.
like, I want this cholesterol test and I want this LDL test and I want a cardiac CT or whatever it is. My doctor's like, okay. And then she'll just write it.
I love it. I love it. You and I'm so glad that we
Yeah.
met.
Thank you.
I always call it kismet, you know, sitting there and having this conversation and we got to meet and I got to hear your story because really in the end, the stories are what matters. And this is the way to really put the information out there to people who need to hear it over and over again. And sometimes, and it took probably Dana a little while to get you to be like, oh,
It did.
so sometimes people have to yeah, people have to hear it over and over again. And honestly, I put things out on social media all the time, even my personal Facebook page, every single day. And I'm sure it is annoying to certain people, but it won't be when they
If it
it
saves their
happens
life.
to them and they'll be like, "Oh my gosh, Jamie put something out there about this." So I don't let any of that bother me. I want people to know, and I really truly have a fire in my belly to
Well,
save the
you've
world,
created a wonderful
honestly.
podcast to help others. So, Jamie, thank you. I really appreciate you asking me
Well,
to be
thank
on it.
you. Yeah, absolutely. You have an important and fascinating story to tell, and maybe we can get back on and talk about other things at another time. And in the meantime, I think we need to go get our
Let's
nails
do the
done then.
nails.
Yeah, so you let me know, and I just appreciate your being on, taking your time to tell the story. And to my audience, thank you very much for joining us on this episode of Test Those Breasts. We will see you next time on the next episode. Bye for now.
Thanks, Jamie. It was a total pleasure.